Welcome to the Programming Electronics Academy podcast. Join us every other week as we explore how everyday people are creating extraordinary things in the world. Find us online at programmingelectronics.com.
Hello, hope you're doing fantastic. This is Michael with Programming Electronics Academy, and we've got a really interesting show this week. I'm glad that you could join us. So today we've got Ken Burns on. He is the owner, founder, creator of a company called TinyCircuits. They're based in Akron, Ohio. They do a lot of neat stuff, but really they build a system that's like a miniaturized Arduino. It can be programmed, their system can be programmed with the Arduino IDE. It's kind of like plug and play. They stack similar to like Arduino Shield stack. You'll hear more about it in the talk, but it's really neat. I've had the pleasure to meet Ken on several different occasions because I used to live in Akron, Ohio, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start the show. Well, Ken, thanks so much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it.
So Ken, you've been running the company TinyCircuits for many years now. I know it's seen a ton of growth, and I just, the stuff that's coming out of there, lots of interesting stuff. And sometimes I feel like you guys do a little bit of mind reading when I think, it'd be cool if, and then I feel like in a couple months, like, oh, hey, okay, they saw that too. But so a lot of neat stuff going on there. Some of the stuff I want to jump into and talk to, but I'm kind of interested a little bit about your journey and how you got kind of where you started with electronics and your programming background and how you ended up owning this really cool company.
Yeah, so my background, I've always been kind of a hardcore hobby nerd type growing up. And so, growing up with Legos and kind of tinkering around with stuff, always taking devices apart. And so I kind of had the, as they call it, the knack for engineering. And so I decided to go and become an electrical engineer because it just made a lot of sense for what I like to do. And so I really kind of love that. I went through, got a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering, and then worked at a couple small companies we're based in Ohio, in the Ohio area. And then for 10 years worked at a basically product design firm that's right outside of Cleveland, Ohio, where we would help other companies develop products. So they come to us with an idea, anywhere from small startup companies up to big Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies. So we kind of work as an extension to their internal engineering, or we do all the electronics for them. So during the 10 years there, really got to work on about 50 different products, all sorts of different things from consumer to medical to industrial type products. And during that time, just had always wanted to kind of go out on my own and do something. And one thing we did really very, almost all the time was coming up with concepts to show off a prototype. And so this is in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And really the only option was you'd go buy all sorts of different development boards from whether it's Microchip or Freescale, who knows what, wire these things together. You'd have kind of this huge mess, and then try to package it into something. So my thoughts were, what if we could kind of come up with a miniature system? And it's really to solve my own pain point that wouldn't it be nice if we just had something I could just plug together? And so that's kind of where the basic idea started. I was wanted to create a little sensor system that I could plug together. I was looking for processors at the time. And this is the late 2000s, early 2010. And Arduino started to become popular at the time. And as in kind of the professional world, I guess people look down on Arduino as kind of like a toy system. But I really started to take a closer look at it and what was going on in the kind of the hobby community, and realized that this really solved a lot of the problems that professional engineers were having. And so I decided to kind of base a little processor platform around that, and then started to show it to people. And actually, I believe I showed it to you. Or maybe, I know you were one of the very early Akron Makerspace meetings way back when.
Yeah, I remember that. That was fun.
And so that's actually, I kind of had this idea, and I was new to the whole maker realm. I was much more on the professional side of things where people I guess are a bit more closed-minded. So I went to one of these early meetings befber the group even started up, the Akron Makerspace, which was Synahack at the time, with the idea of, what if somebody made a very miniature Arduino system that was stackable. And so I got a lot of great feedback from people at those meetings and kind of grew the idea over the next year or two, built up my own prototypes, and then, decided to launch this crazy thing. Actually, it'll be 5 years this September. So we're coming up on our 5th anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
I launched a Kickstarter campaign, and and we had a goal of $10,000, and it did over $100,000. So that really convinced me that, there is some validity to this, and then quit my other job and started up really TinyCircuits at that point. And one of the unique things too is that we actually make everything in house. So it's kind of a crazy idea was to get our own, SMT line so we could actually manufacture all the boards here locally. So it's been a fun run over the last 5 years of growing that and keep expanding. So it's pretty cool.
Man, that is exciting. That job, where you're getting to work on different products, that sounds really neat too. I'm sure you learned so much. That must have been great.
Oh yeah, it's a great place. I still deal with those guys all the time. It's as a beginning engineer, because I worked at a couple smaller places, but that was where I spent the bulk of, I guess, my real engineering career. Not to say TinyCircuits isn't real, but it's, actually working in an engineering role and then getting into product management, that actually designing a product that's going to be manufactured is a lot different than kind of on the, I don't want to say like a lot of the hobby type things where you're doing something on your desk, but actually make it that it can be manufactured in volume. And certainly dealing with things in one of the big customers I was dealing with was in kind of the industrial wireless control realm. And so just dealing with all those different situations going on there and seeing the challenges involved and dealing with all of these huge companies, these Emersons and Honeywells and Siemens and people like that, it was a huge learning experience. And that really kind of helped when I jumped out on my own, that I kind of really understood really well what it takes to manufacture something in scale. And I think if you look at a lot of the Kickstarters that people do, that's the number one thing that burns projects on a Kickstarter or Indiegogo type platform. Somebody has a great idea and they prototype it, but when they try to mass produce it, they run into all sorts of crazy issues and just waste all their money and then end up going broke. So having that background was huge, and I think that's why we're able to actually move forward and kind of approach it realistically and not try to do something too crazy at first, and actually get to the point where I don't want to say we're hugely profitable, but we're actually making some money, after 5 years, and we're not about to go broke, and we can do some cool stuff now.
That's cool. And I'm sure that's got to help a lot with the cred for any Kickstarter when they can see that the designer behind it has experience getting things to market. That's just to be able to have that expertise and deliver on it. Now, I know before the call we were talking about the TinyArcade, which we'll talk about here shortly, but how you were able to fulfill that after the Kickstarter and that time frame. I was just like, man, that seems pretty quick. I'm pretty impressed with that, but. Yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah, we try to get better, and so definitely doing a Kickstarter. That first Kickstarter even with that experience, it was a huge challenge, especially trying to manufacture it ourselves. And so that's one of those things that I think people underestimate, including myself. Even having that experience, I was always on the design side, and we'd have other people manufacture it. And so maybe I was naive, just thinking, you just get a pick and place machine and push a button and boom, everything's built. The reality is much different than that. But yeah, we've kind of learned through doing Kickstarters and just production on a daily basis that, how to kind of gauge the timelines. And so, Kickstarters are notoriously late for delivery. And we're trying to get better. We're planning to do another big one this fall, kind of, because it's been 5 years. So kind of major new revamp to the whole TinyDuino line with some new processors and a bunch of new options. Kind of roll that all into like a major platform update. And that definitely we want to actually hit the target. Like TinyArcade, we're a month or two late, which in Kickstarter terms is actually very good.
Yeah.
But we actually want to meet the date, which is extremely rare. Um, and I think we've got, kind of the track record that and a plan in place that we can actually do that this time.
I'm curious, Ken, why manufacture in-house? Was that I'm curious what guided that decision. I mean, I would think that it would be less work on your end. I mean, I don't know. This is me guessing. I would think it'd be less work on your end to have that done somewhere else. But I'm curious why the emphasis on the in-house. I think it's awesome. Obviously, being a previous person from Akron, I love the fact that you were manufacturing locally. But what was your intention there?
There's actually a strong business case for why we do it. So in our case, like when we did the initial TinyDuino line on Kickstarter, there were about 20 different products that we had. So we had the base processor, and if you haven't actually seen it before, basically these work like little electronic Legos. So each of the different shields, which we call tiny shields, kind of just plug in like Legos into the main board, and you can stack, almost like a standard Arduino system where you can stack shields on top of it. It's the same basic idea that all these little tiny shields you can just plug in. So as part of that Kickstarter, we had about 20 different boards that would plug into the system. And even though we did like over 100,000, each board we might be making a few hundred of any particular board variation. And electronics manufacturing is really all about volume. So if you outsource to anyone in the US or even in China, what they do is it's basically kind of a flat fee to set up the machinery to run a particular set of boards. And in the US, it can be like $1,000 per board run. In our case, where we're selling things to makers at a very low price point, some boards are like $10. If we're only making 100 particular board and you got to pay $1,000 setup fee, obviously that doesn't work too well. It works fine if we're making tens of thousands of something. But again, in our case, we're building 20 different things at very low volumes. And so even if you go over to Asia or to China, those costs still do exist. And so it's not really that much cheaper. And actually it costs more if we're to do outside. So we made the determination that let's go ahead and buy our own electronics production machinery and build it in-house. And if you look at the other successful like open source maker type companies in the US, namely like Adafruit and SparkFun, they followed the same kind of path where they would start to build in-house at low volume and scale up. And they both still, manufacture their own electronic products in-house. And so that was kind of, the fact that they had succeeded doing that kind of gave it some credibility. And even doing it ourselves, basically our cost per board to actually manufacture it, when you figure in machine time, personnel time to run the machines and inspect and test, we're basically doing around $1 per board in terms of cost. And if you're to look to go outside anywhere, that'd be more to like $5 or $10 per board in our volumes. And so we just have to raise the prices on things if we did that, and it wouldn't make sense. We wouldn't be able to compete. And so made the determination early on that if we manufacture in-house, it gives us a lot of flexibility to do all these super low volume products at a decent price point and not entirely crazy prices. And so it's just, it's been painful too. It's not easy. And we made a lot of mistakes in the early years. We brought on basically a full-time production supervisor about 3 years ago, Dave, who has about 20 years experience, and he really kind of streamlined our process. We've gotten very good at it now. We're getting about 99% first pass throughput through our line. So that's like boards come out and they just work 99% of everything, will pass everything without even having to be touched. And then that 1% we can usually a minor thing like a short or something. But early on, we're doing like under 50%. So everything would have to be touched by hand to fix things. And so it's worked out for us. And so it lets us do a crazy amount of different products. We can come out with like very low volume products quickly, test things out. And yeah, it's just made a lot of sense.
That's really interesting. And, you know, I also got to say that in addition to the money side of it, it just looks cool. Like when I've come and see your place, it's so, I don't know, it just looks so industrial, so sweet. And I don't know, it's cool to have that.
No,
It's fantastic to have that locally, you know?
Yeah, we like it too. I mean, we sell mostly to makers, and so as part of that, being able to be in touch with how you actually make the stuff, I think is just useful, as opposed to just design a board and send it out, and you get something built, and you don't really understand everything that's gone into it. So it helps from our engineering side too, just being able to be completely in touch with the whole manufacturing process. So it's gotten myself as an engineer and our other engineers just better in touch with how to actually make things that can be produced. Because you can design a board to do all sorts of crazy things, but then when you realize that actually how you make something and produce 10,000 of something, that's kind of a very useful skill that I think a lot of engineers aren't completely in touch with. And then, like you say, yeah, we're in a very cool place. We're in an old rubber factory in the heart of Akron, Ohio. And so, at one point it was the largest rubber factory in the world. And so we're in this old brick building that's kind of really unique and cool. So we're on the 5th floor. I go up big freight elevators every day to get up to our space. And actually, since you were here last, Mike, we've actually expanded. So we've got 7,000 square feet now in the space. And we've got we just brought online a new pick and place machine, a new laser cutter this spring. And so our capabilities are much better than in the early days. Part of that was like you hinted at the TinyArcade, that we had really a huge spike last year when we released that kind of for retail, and we just couldn't keep up with demand. So we decided to expand a bit. So we brought on more people, got some new machines. And then the cool thing is that kind of feeds other products that we can do. It gives us a lot of capability to do even smaller type boards and do things faster and cheaper. And so that just benefits everyone all around, that we can get our prices down even more and just keep coming out with cool new things.
That's awesome. Now, I've used a lot of the TinyCircuits before. I've used the TinyDuino and I think the Tiny Lily, and I know I've used a lot of the shields, like Wi-Fi. I think I may have used an older version of the Wi-Fi shield. But so for people who are listening, I know you mentioned you had 20 when you started. You probably have more than that now. But I'm curious, would you mind just spouting off some of the different shields that go with the TinyCircuit system?
Yeah, I think we're definitely over 50. I don't know if we're to 60 yet. But yeah, there's a lot of different categories. So certainly sensors, accelerometers, like 9-axis sensor, gyro, compass, ambient light, those sorts of things. So there's probably about 10 different boards that kind of fit in that class. And then communication. So Bluetooth, namely Bluetooth Low Energy, is really popular with our stuff to connect up to cell phones, because our stuff's very small, so it's very good for like wearables. So you can make like a little watch or a fitness tracker or something. So connecting up to a cell phone. We found Bluetooth Low Energy is probably our most popular communication type shield. And then certainly like Wi-Fi. We've got some longer range radios that are like 433 megahertz. We're working on some newer ones. One of the biggest requests we have is for like GSM cellular, and we are working on it. Right now we kind of point people like Adafruit, the phono boards that can be connected in pretty easily. Cellular is pretty challenging, especially in our form factor. But it's a huge request. And then a number of different like motor type controllers, so servo boards, motor drivers, because we've got a lot of people making little robots and little things that move around, and then displays. And so, a number of different LED type shields. The one big one, we did our second Kickstarter was around what we call the tiny screen, which is a little OLED screen that fits on the platform. And that's kind of been, that was really the driving force behind the TinyArcade, because that's really just a variant of that. And we're using that screen in all sorts of different things. So there's a kid's smartwatch that came out 2 years ago from an 8-year-old in California that used our circuitry, and we kind of teamed up with them to do some custom things. So he actually launched his own Kickstarter campaign. I think it's just about 2 years ago. And they're still making those. So a little smartwatch for kids, kind of geared at kind of, learning 3D printing, electronics, and software. But yeah, really all sorts of different boards to plug in. So almost anything you can get with the standard Arduino, we would have basically compatible sensor or communication option in our platform as well. And again, the idea is to make it super small and also very easy to use. So generally, there's no soldering involved. Just kind of plug the boards together and you're good to go. And then there's different breakout boards too. So you can still have access to all the standard Arduino Shield signals. So if you need to hook up some external sensor, there's different breakout boards to get access to any of the signals to hook up for your system.
That's cool. And so you can program these in the Arduino IDE, is that correct?
Yeah. Kind of the whole mindset early on was let's just make a completely Arduino Uno compatible system and shrink it down. And so it's the exact same processor that's on the Arduino Uno. So it's the ML328P. And the same with the Tiny Lily. It's basically a little sewable variant. So those are designed to be basically completely compatible with our Arduino environment. What we have new coming out, and actually this is going to be what's around the Kickstarter we're doing in September, is what we're calling the Tiny Zero, which is basically an Arduino Zero processor. So it's a 32-bit ARM processor. We're currently using it in, we have a new version of the Tiny Screen that has a processor built in and USB built in. So we've been using that processor in that variant for a while. But we're going to have a new standalone processor that has lithium charging built in, the USB built in, all into one little 20 by 20 millimeter board, and have a lot more horsepower and memory. And so that's one of the big complaints people have with like the standard Arduino system, is there's just not enough memory, especially if you add like Wi-Fi or GPS or something like that to it. That sucks up a lot of memory. And so this new platform really addresses a lot of that. And it's really good. We've had a lot of good feedback on it. It's what's in the arcade. It's got really good Arduino support now. Early on, when Arduino first came out with the Zero, it was a little bit lacking, and so we didn't want to switch over to it immediately. But this is kind of going to be, well, we'll still have the standard TinyDuinos that have, basically Arduino Uno compatibility, but we really see this being kind of what most people would use as their base platform. And it would support all the standard shields we have and completely Arduino compatible. And so everything would just kind of work as is, but it'd be a lot more horsepower and oomph,
That's
behind the
nice.
system. So,
And it's still that I know 20 millimeter by 2, that's still like that quarter size?
yeah. So it'd still be exactly the same size. And so the idea there would be, it'd just be a different processor option that you could use if you needed it. And all the same shields would work. The other big thing that we'd be releasing too as part of that Kickstarter is we don't have a good name for it yet. Call them tiny boards, which I don't know if you noticed, we use tiny a lot. So we need a good name for it. But basically these are similar, if you've ever seen the Seed Studio Grove type sensors, which are basically just little sensor boards that communicate over like an I2C bus. So one of the, I don't want to say complaints, but one of the challenges with our system is if you have a sensor and you want to place it remotely, the only way to connect that is, kind of over this 32-pin connector that we have. And so it doesn't really lend itself nicely to being wired remotely. And so this new system are basically these little tiny sensor boards that are much smaller than our standard boards. So they're about under 10 by 10 millimeters, and would have a 5-pin cable that you can connect remotely. And so it's basically very similar to that Seed Studio Grove system, although it's got a few extra pins on it to let you do analog sensors as well. But the idea is these would be very cheap, very small little remote sensors. And so we've got about 25 different boards designed for that system. So the same basic thing that you could use it with ours, or you could use it with a standard Arduino system too. Is the idea that it's just be these little tiny sensors, whether it's an accelerometer or ambient light or color sensor or who knows what, on a little board that you can mount remotely and connect in your system. And it's not some big honking Arduino shield to implement just a simple little sensor. And so those, and we basically have a little adapter board for our standard, TinyDuino system. And so, but it really lets you do a lot of things that you can't easily do with our standard system. And so we're kind of looking forward to that coming out at the same time as the TinyZero. So we think that's really going to address a lot of the issues or concerns that people have when they're doing projects where they build some robot and they need sensors across their little servo motors all over the thing. You'd be able to kind of distribute that very easily with this kind of system.
That is really cool. So we've mentioned it a couple times, but I don't feel like we've really jumped into it yet. You mentioned the TinyArcade. Would you just kind of briefly describe it a little bit?
Yeah, so the TinyArcade, it's kind of almost a variant of our standard TinyCircuit system. So early on, it started as just a prototype where we're kind of showing off the little tiny screen that we had. And a designer we work with that does 3D printing kind of made a little arcade cabinet around it. And we took it to maker fairs and shows, and everybody's like, I want to buy one. I want to buy one. And the issue is that 3D printing is just kind of pricey in that kind of size. And so we decided to make kind of a special version of an Arduino system that you can play games on. And the current TinyArcade basically has a acrylic cabinet that you put together like a kit, almost like a puzzle, a couple boards that plug together. So there's no soldering or anything. And then it's all Arduino based. And so you can write your own games for it, or you can just download games for free and play them. So there's a large community of people out there now that have TinyArcades and are making games for it. It's been really popular in Japan lately, which is, I guess, no surprise. And so there's a few developers out in Japan that are releasing really cool games for this. New one just came out like a week or two ago. And so the idea is it's just kind of this little fun gadget you can keep on your desk at work, or kids love it. And you put together yourself in 10, 15 minutes. And if you want, you can create games for it.
That's cool.
And
so it looks like an arcade. Like if you walked into an arcade, though, that's the kind of
it looks like an old school arcade cabinet.
Okay.
So there's a little joystick on it and some buttons. It's got a speaker and a battery built into it. And so the idea is kind of like the old Pac-Man type arcade cabinet, and but it's only like 3.5 inches tall.
Awesome.
So it's a lot of fun, and the screen looks amazingly good. So if you go to our website, tinycircuits.com, you can see videos of it. It's been featured on a number of different blogs. It's been on Mashable and tested.com and all sorts of different places. And so it's a cool little system that you can put together, hack on if you want. So it's definitely kind of a toy, but again, it's geared at makers and hobbyists that you can tweak on it. And then the cool thing too is the latest version has, I was talking about those little tiny boards, those little sensor things. We've got a connector on the TinyArcade, and so you can kind of hack with it if you want. So you can put different sensors on it, or we've got even like the different little remote displays or LEDs you can throw on there. But it's really geared at kind of people that are playing around with electronics, or you can just play it as a little arcade video game, which is cute. But we like the fact that people can kind of hack on it.
Well, we've already kind of touched on what you guys have planned for the future. Is there anything else you want to throw out there? Any last words? Any last thoughts?
I know a lot of the people listening to this are new to electronics and playing around with Arduino, and I'd say keep up with it. It's a huge amount of fun. There's so much you can do out there with playing with electronics, with firmware. I still love doing it. I'm going to work on some firmware later today and playing around with electronics. And unfortunately, I don't get to do a lot of that anymore. Doing more company type stuff. But I just love it, and it's so much fun to play around with electronics and software, and really understanding that just gives you a lot of appreciation for the way things in the world are going in terms of you see all these fancy new cell phones and self-driving cars, and just really understanding what's going on behind the scenes is extremely cool. And I love doing it. So I definitely encourage everyone listening to keep tinkering and playing with electronics and play with Arduino.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ken.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Well, hey, that's a wrap. I really enjoyed talking to Ken. I hope you found it helpful, useful, interesting too. We'll make sure to link to the TinyCircuits website. You can check out their TinyArcade, all the cool stuff. And I look forward to seeing how their Kickstarter goes. It sounds like it's going to be pretty neat stuff. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love for you to go into iTunes, rate the show. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe. We release a show every other week on Monday mornings. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, whatever it might be for you. Take it easy. Till next time. Bye.
This show is produced by Programming Electronics Academy, an online technology education company. We exist to help you create the technology you want in your life. If you are interested in learning more about Arduino, we welcome you to sign up for our free Arduino Crash Course, a 12-part video series with accompanying written lessons designed to teach the basics of programming Arduino. To register for the course, simply text your email address to 440-701-5311, or you can visit programmingelectronics.com and sign up there.